Hey folks, Saunders, Nick Farabaugh here, Pittsburgh Sports Lab with Draft Talk. A rare Wednesday episode here for us, but a bunch of stuff happened today at the Combine, some of it literally right in front of us, and just wanted to kind of touch base with you guys about the news of the day. So obviously the big deal that happened at the Combine today was the news out of Georgia that Georgia defensive tackle Jalen Carter has a warrant out for his arrest stemming from the automobile accident that killed his teammate and a Georgia staffer earlier this offseason, and that might change things at the top of this draft. And defensive tackle is obviously a position that the Steelers have interest in. And then a little bit later this afternoon, a CBS Sports mock draft came out where Carter is there for the Steelers at 17. So I figured, okay, let's talk about that because that feels like that's going to be a thing. So I guess let's start with the beginning. Do you think that this news today is going to be seriously crippling to Carter's draft stock? I mean, he's missing the rest of the Combine now, so that's going to take an impact. Like, he was probably the number one pick before this. What happens now?
I mean, I think it does hurt it, right? Anytime you get in legal trouble, and it's not just character concerns. I mean, we have drunk driving. I mean, he drunk drove, right? His blood alcohol level was 0.197, according to reports. And so you're going to have to vet all that information. Like, that's a serious allegation. And then you race, and then you do all this stuff. Like, they're misdemeanors, but those are serious allegations. And
yeah, he's not been charged with DUI. He's charged with racing.
Yeah, he wasn't charged with DUI, but his blood alcohol level was above the legal limit.
Yeah, racing and
reckless driving.
Reckless driving, both of which are misdemeanors in Georgia. So I mean, I agree. Like, I think it hurts.
Like,
I think not being here hurts.
Yeah.
Like, he gets only through the medical testing and then will leave. So
some interviews. Probably.
That means probably about half of his team interviews aren't going to take place now. If a team is in the top 5, they're still going to go to Georgia's pro day. Like, that's not that end of the world. But I mean, I don't think the on-field events really matter that much for defensive linemen, as we've talked about before. I just think it's a situation where, and especially the way it happened, like, if it had happened, but now that the police are saying that he lied to the police about it and tried to cover it up, and I think that plays back into the character concerns. I do think it hurts. However, I don't think it causes him to fall 16 spots in the first round.
I think it could. Listen, I mean, the question is, Laramie Tunsil fell down the board quite a bit when his thing came out. But the reason I bring up Laramie Tunsil is we are at, March 1st.
Yeah.
Does this get solved before April 29th? Do we know?
Probably.
28th, I think, is actually what it is. 27th. No, I keep moving it up. Whatever the day of the draft is. But does it get solved by then? And I think that's the question of clarity, right? Because you read the media reports and what the police said, but also Carter said he said all this is wrong, and so we don't have full clarity on what actually happened just yet. So we have conflicting reports coming out. Obviously, he's going to Athens to face these charges, and then he's going to get the right to an attorney, and then we're going to see what happens in the court of law.
I mean, these charges are not.
They're not like he's not going to face jail time.
One is essentially a speeding ticket. I mean, the other one, the racing, is a more serious charge. But I mean, you're not looking at.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to jail.
Let's put it to you this way: if these two charges were not connected with that type of an incident, it would not affect a player's draft stock.
Yeah.
One bit. If tomorrow we find out that one of the top quarterbacks was here in Indianapolis and got charged with 2 driving related misdemeanors, nobody's going to knock them down the draft board for that. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
But I think because of the accusation aligned to the police and trying to hide it, and the already existing character concerns with Jalen Carter, I do think it will affect him.
I do. I don't know how much it will. I'll say this. I think he does not get out of the first round.
No chance.
I think that's
no
true.
Chance.
But 16 spots, I mean, that's realistic to me. I mean,
I think that's way too far.
I think it's realistic. I think there's enough, there are teams that need DTs, but I think there's enough teams that don't need a DT so bad that they have to take Carter that early.
How much does this impact the Chicago Bears' ability to trade the first overall pick?
Well, I think instead of leveraging Jalen Carter, you're leveraging Will Anderson now. which is an equally good.
But if the
first-round
Bears
pick.
were only going to trade down like 1 or 2 spots, that was kind of the talk, was that they were going to trade down like, oh, maybe to 3, maybe to 4, and a lot of the other teams involved in that process are quarterback teams. It looked to me like the Bears were trading down and saying, we'll take whichever of Carter and Anderson is left after the quarterback teams go. Does this mean the Bears say, oh, all right, maybe the Bears stay there and take Will Anderson?
Maybe they do, or maybe they trade back further. It's possible they move back down to 7-8 now, right?
And then take Carter there.
Yeah, and then take Carter there, or maybe they like Brian Brzee enough, where maybe Brzee now. I think this could have a ricochet effect where Brzee becomes maybe the first DT off the board. That's possible.
I think 17 is far too far. But we'll see what happens with the legal process and all that, and what changes between now and then. The other thing I think is like, you mentioned Laremy Tunsil. If what happened to Laremy Tunsil had happened on March 1st, like I don't think it affects him that much. Like we've got a month and a half until the draft, and so I'm a little skeptical it's going to play out as drastically as that one.
Yeah, I mean a similar situation maybe you could use is Jeffrey Simmons, where his thing happened long before, but he still went in the first round, right?
Yeah.
Well, he went in 20s.
Yeah.
So I mean,
but he was not talked about as like a number 1 overall pick like Carter is.
And so maybe he does go early, and then there's also the part of this that even if he is at 17, I'm not sure the Steelers are the team that will do it. I just they haven't been willing in recent years to take chances on guys with character concerns. And the one thing that everyone will say is, well, what about George Pickens? He really there was no truth to anything that the media made about George Pickens. He's just a guy that plays with an edge. That's what he is. It's different than like, oh, this guy got charged with 2 driving misdemeanors. Like the Steelers just haven't really gone to guys in recent years since they got burned in the mid 2010s. When they started to take chances, they just haven't done it. So I'm not sure if the Steelers would even be the team, even if he is there at 17, to stop it. I think there are plenty of teams that will. I'm just not sure the Steelers are one of them.
Like I said, I think there will be one far before then that would make that pick. Whether the Steelers would do it or not, I don't really know. I think it's really hard to say because I don't know that we have a good read on Omar Khan's thoughts about this kind of thing. We have a new general manager, and we don't have a lot of track record for his decision making. And now, obviously, especially when you're talking about the first round pick, Art Rooney's going to be involved. But I think if Omar was either 100% behind it or 100% against it, that would play a factor.
Sure.
And I don't really think that we know.
And I think there's also the question of how much the recent tendency to go away from those players was a Colbert thing, a Tomlin thing, or an Art Rooney thing.
Right.
Is it an Art thing? If it's an Art thing, well, there's no chance this is happening.
Right. Yeah.
If it was a Colbert thing,
then maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other piece of news that came out today that I want to talk about pretty briefly, survey from the NFLPA comes out, not super friendly to the Steelers regarding their facility on the south side, especially in their treatment of the players' families at Acrisure Stadium. I kind of just wanted to talk about it a little bit because I feel like we wrote an article on the site, steelersnow.com. Go read it, please. But I feel like it deserves some context to the discussion because there's a lot of factors here. First of all, the methodology for this survey was weird, right?
Yeah.
So like you look at like the Steelers locker room, for example. The Steelers got a D for the D minus for the locker room, but also 80% of the Steelers players approved of their locker room. It just means that like almost all the other teams approve of that.
It was weird.
But to me, that's not a D, right? That just means like you're 80% and 80% is low, right? But
what they basically here, the methodology was if you're lower than a 90% in any metric, it's a bad thing.
Right. Which is, I mean, that's fine if that's the standard, but like to me, that does not say like D says, oh, like 40% are happy. Like, no, most of the Steelers players are fairly happy with the way things are. I do think that the things that the Steelers picked out are certainly weaknesses.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think it's obvious to us because we're there every day. And we see it, but
the building's not big enough.
No, it's
not.
not.
It's just not.
And it's shared by 2 teams. First of all,
right.
Pitt has better facilities. First of all,
well,
Pitt
better. Absolutely.
And it's not surprising because they're an NCAA team.
Right. They have a recruiting
and all that. Right. So it's not surprising, but one of the biggest things was the Southside locker room was too small. Guys, I'm telling you, it is. They tuck what? Who were they tucking in the corners this year? Minka's was tucking in the corner. Calvin
I
Austin
mean,
was
they
tucking in the
won
corner.
a corner because the corners used to be good, but I
Yeah.
don't know that it is.
It's not. They barely. I mean, DeMarvin Leal barely had any room to change this year in
Yeah.
his little neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And with 69 guys in there, with 53 plus a practice squad, and plus more sometimes with some of the injured guys.
Yeah, if you have
around,
10
I mean,
guys on the injured reserve, you have, you
Yeah.
know, and when the Steelers come, so that last week of the preseason, after they break camp, but before the season starts, they're there with 80 guys. They have like lockers and aisles, and there's play.
It's a mess.
It's a mess. It's absolutely too small. But I don't know how they fix it. Like the building is the size it is. I don't know how they make it any bigger.
Yeah, I don't know how they make that any bigger. I will say that I think there are a few other things in this survey that they can fix very easily.
Yeah, the stuff at the stuff with
the
the
weight
family,
room?
the stuff with the families
Yeah.
at the Acrisure Stadium. I think.
I mean,
You know, when we come out of the locker room there at the end of the game,
That's
the
where
families are all just standing in the
Yeah.
tunnel with like the garbage truck driving
Yeah.
by and the visiting teams, moving staff,
Yeah.
all
I
packing
mean-
stuff up.
I mean, we
There's no really any place for them to go.
So the post game meeting area was 31st out 32 because the post game meeting area is the tunnel.
It's a hallway.
Yeah, it's just the hallway, and it's
And most of them do it on the field. Like
Yeah.
when we get back up to the press box, you can see players and their families all hanging out together on the field
yeah.
most of the time.
And some families like that, but some families probably like it elsewhere to have a nice little area where privately they.
Yeah, well,
can
there is
congregate
no
together.
area, right? So
Right.
I mean, you got a tunnel, you got the field, or you got the tunnel. That's
Yeah.
it.
I mean, and there's no actual family area in the stadium itself, which is kind of abnormal. They're one of 14, and they're one of 11 that don't provide daycare for game day, which is also something. I mean, those are 3 easy fixes to me. I mean, just pretty easily you can refurbish.
Yeah, I
just
think
like
the
they
problems with the South Side are. Well, that was the other one. Like, there was a question like, do you think Art Rooney would spend money to improve the facilities? I'm like, they just redid their weight room in 2016. It cost like $10 million.
Yeah.
Like, I think he would spend money to improve the facilities. I think the biggest problem with the South Side is just that the building isn't big enough, and I don't know how you. There's a road and a river and a railroad track. Like, there's nowhere to grow.
So there's nowhere to grow. Now I think that the training room is something that they can really hammer out, and part of that was that they just didn't feel like they had enough staff. Maybe the notoriously small training staff
You
potentially.
mean the strength and conditioning
Yeah,
staff?
and they said it
because
was
their
notoriously
training,
small.
their physical training, they got a very strong marks for. But the strength and conditioning staff is relatively small.
And players did say that they were hoping that would get bigger. They felt like, maybe they didn't have enough time to get, specific PT in. And,
So I don't know. I
different
think it was like a
things.
big bad headline, and really, when you break down to it, with a little nuance, there's really only like a couple things people
Yeah.
are asking for, and really they're not that big of a deal.
I mean,
the
it's
whole
not.
point of this scorecard from the NFLPA was to try to give free agents an idea about what they're walking into when they go to a different team. I don't think that this, when you compare it to the other teams, is some sort of big red flag that's going to keep anyone
No.
from coming to Pittsburgh.
And there's a few things that the NFLPA did note too. Mike Tomlin's a very loved coach. The family environment around the Steelers consistently gets high marks among the players. So there are other things here that weren't measured that the NFLPA was kind of mentioned as like, okay, the Steelers
also
have this.
they were what, like 7th best food.
Yeah.
And
They have great.
if you know
nutrition.
anything about football players, 7th best food is extremely important.
Well, they need linemen, so they
Right.
need linemen. So the linemen will love
And
it.
it's also very important to us.
Yeah, very important.
But did you see that the Cardinals charged them for food?
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
crazy
now
stuff like
that going on, to
So-
me, like that's a red flag. Where if
Yeah.
I'm a free agent, I'm like, what's going on here? Like,
I
what
mean,
what kind of work environment am I
there was
walking
nothing
into?
in this that you or I were surprised by.
No,
nothing
no.
egregious.
And I thought if it had been done with a little bit more, I don't want to say that the methodology is wrong, but it just wasn't. You didn't like take a glance and really get what they were saying without reading
yeah,
into it.
like the best team in this mark was the Vikings, and all their stuff is new. They just built a brand new practice facility and everything. That is, if you're talking about a way the Steelers can get, I think the lowest score the Vikings had was A minus. If you're talking about how the Steelers can get A minus to above, the only way I see them actually getting to that is leaving that Southside facility
Yeah, and
building a new
we can
one.
talk about that. I mean, it's 20 years old, right? I mean, they've put a lot of money into it though, and so I don't think that is their plan. But it's not unreasonable to think that sometime in the not maybe near future, but medium future, 5 to 10 years, that the Steelers could look at relocating or building a new facility. It is very clear that things are very, very cramped on the south side between Pitt and the Steelers. There's never anywhere to park. The cafeteria is overflowing at times. There's frequently conflicts about who is trying to use the field when, and oh, we're going to go inside. No, we wanted to go inside. And so it would not totally surprise me if in the next few years the Steelers came up with a plan to build their own facility somewhere else. I doubt it will be outside the city. I think Art Rooney has been pretty steadfast on that. But it would not totally shock me if they, wanted to go somewhere else. The funny thing is that family thing was really the only ding against Acrisure Stadium.
I think that was the one thing with some new info. Like, I didn't know about the daycare stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I never really knew to investigate, first of all, but it does seem like something that every team should have. These guys do have families, and sometimes it's hard to coordinate. So I think that is something that they can fix very easily.
Yeah.
And I'm certain. I wonder if that's even something that Art knew about. Like, that could be something that maybe Art is like hearing about for the first time now, and I think
this is something that the players want. Yeah,
and he's like, oh,
well, that's the purpose of this whole exercise. And like I said, I think it was a scary headline, but I don't think it's anything big or bad for the Steelers. All right, I think that was it as far as big news today, and we'll get back to the normal draft talk tomorrow, Thursday. We talked to the defensive linemen, linebackers today. Tomorrow we're talking to defensive backs, and so we'll have all the latest on basically all the defensive prospects. We'll be able to sort of break them all down for you, and we'll do that in the next episode of Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live tomorrow. Until then, check out all the coverage at SteelersNow.com. It is like overflowing with stories from the Combine for myself, Nick. Carl Ludwig's here from Pittsburgh Sports Now with us. Dan Angels, our Indianapolis stringer, he's here. So we're just filling it all up, all kinds of stuff going on. And make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel here. All these interviews we're doing are showing up here on the YouTube channel as we get them in. There's a whole bunch of you. Just scroll back through the feed already from today, and there will be more and more and more throughout the week. So check it out. So until then, next time, we'll see you tomorrow, and enjoy. For Nick, I'm Alan. This is Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live.